It's me, Peter Parker, your friendly neighborhood, you know. I've come a long way from being the kid that was bitten by a spider.
Spider-Man, stop narrating!
What?
Stop narrating!
I agree with how it should have ended here. For some weird reason, Peter's opening monologue in Spider-Man 3 just feels off. Like, immediately you can tell that something is wrong with this film from the get-go. Spider-Man 3 is once again directed by Sam Raimi and stars Tobey Maguire as Spider-Man, Kirsten Dunst as Mary Jane Watson, James Franco as Harry Osborn, as well as many others. Right off the bat, I don't think Spider-Man 3 is a terrible film. Yes, it has its problems, and for sure I will mention these problems in this review, but when people label this film as an incoherent mess that is too packed full of stuff and busy, and also one of the worst comic book films ever made, I don't get it. Like, it's not that bad. I mean, at the end of the day, the film is still a coherent story. Yes, there are some bad choices made in the film, but it's not that bad. Bill Pope's cinematography is as amazing as always, the action is awesome, and overall, there are some genuine nice moments of heart and sincerity in this script. In many ways, I think Sam Raimi and company bring up some really interesting ideas, themes, and lessons that, in many ways, almost work. And to be honest, I genuinely think Sam Raimi is selling Spider-Man 3 short. Like, he's gone on record saying how he thinks Spider-Man 3 is awful, and that the people who say the film is crap are right, and genuinely, I think he's wrong. Like, yes, I understand his mentality of, oh, this film was sort of taken away from me, and I was made to do things that I didn't want to do, and so I made some choices that didn't work, and overall, yes, they're bad. I mean, yes, there are some things in this movie that are genuinely bad, and I will point them out, but at the end of the day, it's not that bad. Like, honestly, I've seen worse superhero movies than this. Genuinely. Like, this movie is problematic, but I don't think it's awful. This is no Catwoman, this is no Elektra, this is no Fantastic Four 2, this isn't 2016 Suicide Squad or Justice League. Spider-Man 3 is just a film that tries to do some things that don't ultimately work. Like I said, there are good ideas in this film, and overall the film is well made, but there are problems. So, without further ado, let's get into it. The main theme of the story is that Peter Parker's growing ego and selfishness ultimately pushes him further away from the love of his life, Mary Jane. He gets corrupted by the symbiote, he has to deal with Harry Osborn becoming the new Goblin, as well as finding out that Flint Marko was actually the man responsible for killing his Uncle Ben, which then ultimately takes him down a path of revenge. There's a lot of things about this film's story that genuinely do work, namely the main theme of Peter's selfishness. When Peter goes to Aunt May asking for her blessing, she tells him that
a man has to be understanding and put his wife before himself.
And throughout the course of the film, he doesn't. He's very selfish in that aspect. He doesn't listen to Mary Jane, he acts on impulse, and ultimately ends up hurting her physically. It's really good stuff. If Spider-Man 2 is about selflessness and sacrifice, Spider-Man 3 is about ego and selfishness. I like that parallel. Ultimately, the core problem with Spider-Man 3 is Peter and Mary Jane's relationship. It is horrible and disgusting and toxic and just so annoying to watch. It's genuinely the worst. Peter Parker in this film is way too happy and so dorky, it is obnoxious. I honestly cringe at the beginning of the film when he sits down to watch Mary Jane's Broadway play and he's all like, that's my girlfriend, and he's like smiling and singing along. Actually, no, I like him singing along. In many ways, that's dorky, but that's also really adorable. It's just his attitude in the scene where he's just like,
it's my girlfriend.
Like, God, he's just so obnoxious. I just want to give him like a slap and just like bring him back to reality. Again, on paper, I get it. You want to make Peter Parker really happy at the beginning of the film, and then by the end you contrast that and have him at his lowest low. It's just that Maguire is overdoing it, and he's being told to overdo it, and just, I don't like it. I can't relate to him. I can't sympathize with him and be happy for him because he's just overdoing it. Also, whenever Peter and Mary Jane have a conversation and they try to talk to one another, Peter just doesn't acknowledge her and he always makes it about himself, and it's really annoying. And here's something I've never understood. If Peter is so in love with Mary Jane, why the fuck does he kiss Gwen Stacy? Like, what? See, I would buy this situation more if he was under the possession of the symbiote, but he isn't. He just does. Or another situation that I think I could have liked is if Gwen goes to kiss him and then Peter pulls away and he's like, why did you do that? And he gets all defensive. That I would have liked, and then that would have cast some doubt over Mary Jane, like, oh my god, Peter, when he's Spider-Man, is so, like, in the moment that he allows someone to kiss him, but Peter realistically is just like, no, I didn't want that to happen. But again, that just doesn't happen, so instead he lets Gwen kiss him, and it's just, it's bad. It's really bad. Also, as much as I like Bryce Dallas Howard, she is just the inferior Gwen Stacy. I mean, especially when you compare her to the love of my life that is Emma Stone, yeah, she's just the inferior Gwen Stacy. God, I love you, Emma.
Oh boy, yeah.
But Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker isn't also to blame for their relationship in this film. Kirsten Dunst's Mary Jane is also at fault. I mean, she is just awful in this movie. She's just so needy. Like, I really don't like it at the beginning when she's like,
"Tell me you love me."
Or how she just doesn't explain any of her problems to Peter. Like, why does she not tell him that she was fired from the play? And then also, when Peter genuinely does try to give her some advice and console her, she ends up just throwing the whole thing back in his face. I mean, yes, sure, he was using the cliche, oh, get back on the horse metaphor, but his heart was still in the right place. Also, why does she kiss Harry? Like, I hated that, especially since in the first film they had no chemistry, and that was the point of their relationship in Spider-Man 1. I genuinely hate Peter and Mary Jane's relationship in this movie. It is so bad, especially since we had to earn that relationship for the past 2 films, and it would have been nice to have just seen Peter and Mary Jane as like a power couple throughout this entire film. Like, the fact that we've had to sit through Spider-Man 1 and 2, Peter pining after Mary Jane, and then at the end of Spider-Man 2, he finally is able to be with her. And then in this movie, it just feels like a slap in the face when they're just constantly at odds with one another. It sucks. Oh, and speaking of their lack of communication, this is something that has always baffled me. How the hell has Peter not told Mary Jane that Harry has now turned evil and is now the new Goblin? This lack of communication is just so weird to me, especially since Peter and Mary Jane are supposed to be this ideal couple. They're not. I genuinely hate their non-communication. Like, it genuinely sucks. Especially in this film, Peter wants to marry her, but it feels like they're barely a couple. Like, it doesn't work. It's really bad. But the thing is, I can't blame Tobey Maguire and Kirsten Dunst wholly because their performances are good. They do well with the material they're given. It's just that the material they're given is crap. Another problem with the film's story is retconning Flint Marko to be Uncle Ben's killer. It just feels like lazy storytelling in order to make Sandman feel like a relevant villain and give him a personal tie to Peter. And honestly, I don't know why Sam Raimi was so focused on trying to make Sandman a primary villain. Sandman, at best in the comics, is a secondary villain. But no, Raimi just keeps forcing him back into the story. When you think we're done with Sandman, no, he just keeps popping back up. Well, I mean, the reason why Raimi keeps bringing him back is obvious because obviously at the end of the final fight when Peter forgives Flint Marko, that's the main lesson here of forgiveness. Peter is supposed to forgive Flint, but just to me, it's really unnecessary. But also, that scene in itself doesn't entirely work because, I mean, Peter tried to kill Flint, and in a way, he doesn't apologize for that, and it's a weird scene, and ultimately, it just feels like it's Raimi and the writers just going, hey, here's this moral about forgiveness, like, there you go, forgiveness is a good thing. Now, it's not to say I dislike Thomas Haden Church as Sandman. In fact, I think he's really good, and in many ways, he looks like he's just been ripped straight off the comic page. Like, he looks so good. The action scenes with Sandman are also pretty great, and the birth of Sandman scene is genuinely beautiful. But yes, there is no denying that the film tries to make you sympathize with him just because he has a sick daughter, which then makes it okay for him to break the law. Now let's get on to the problem with the black suit in Spider-Man 3. And ultimately, the main problem is that they try to cram in 2 films worth of story into 1 film. Film 1 should be everything to do with Peter and the black suit, and ultimately end with Peter getting rid of the black suit, which then allows for film 2 to be the birth of Venom and Spider-Man vs. Venom. We just do not get enough of Peter in the black suit, nor do we get enough Venom to justify having them both in the same film. Plus, the Eddie Brock and Venom character is just not handled in a very complex way. Eddie Brock in this film is just a man who is humiliated by Peter. He goes to church to ask God himself to kill Peter Parker. He then bonds with the symbiote, fights Spider-Man, and dies. I'm sorry, that is just not enough for the character of Venom. And speaking of the black suit in this film, I genuinely hate how Peter can just take it on and off until he can't when he's in the bell tower scene. I also really dislike the fact that it's just the regular Sam Raimi suit just painted black, especially when we get to the amazing scene of Peter pulling out the red and blue suit again. The scene itself is awesome, and in fact it's my favorite rendition of the responsibility theme. But just the problem with that scene is because the costumes look so similar, you just don't feel the impact that much because it doesn't feel like Peter is going back to his roots again. It just looks like he's putting on the same costume again, but it's a different color. I also really dislike the fact how it's played for comedy until it isn't. And no, this is not a dig at the Funky Soul montage. I love that scene so much. It is genuinely funny. In many ways, it's this film's version of the raindrops keep falling on my head montage from Spider-Man 2. And honestly, I love it so much. It is so funny and campy and corny and just, I genuinely love it. It is amazing. However, the scene with Emo Peter / Bully Maguire, whatever you want to call him, that is genuinely bad, is the jazz club scene. That scene sucks.
Now dig on this.
But honestly, I can't hate Emo Peter in this movie. He genuinely is just really funny.
You'll get your rent when you fix this damn door!
I don't know whether it's because he's been memed to death and so it adds that extra layer of enjoyment to the film, but just, I don't know, I just don't find myself getting mad about it.
I guess I've become something of an icon.
Now I will say, the scene where Peter confronts Flint Marko in the subway when he's in the black suit is genuinely a great scene. It's awesome. You can really feel Tobey Maguire's heightened anger from the black suit. It's genuinely great stuff. Remember Ben Parker? The old man that you shot down in cold blood? What does he matter to you anyway? Everything!
Everything!
So good. That is genuinely amazing stuff. If anything, I really wanted more of that stuff because it shows that Tobey Maguire can pull off that more darker, angry version of Peter Parker that is possessed by the Venom symbiote. Just, if only he was like that throughout the entire film, like the shouting and the anger, it's so good. Okay, random side note that I haven't mentioned throughout the past 2 Sam Raimi films. I genuinely love it when Tobey Maguire is like shouting as Spider-Man. To me, it just gives me chills. Like every time he's like, "Hang on, Mary Jane!" It's so cool. I love it so much. It just, I don't know why, it gives me life and it's great.
Hold on, Mary Jane!
Anyways, I digress. Yes, I understand that Sam Raimi was forced to put in the Venom symbiote and that he didn't really much care for the character and nor did he want to do it. And honestly, I can understand that. But just because you've been told to do something you don't want to do doesn't mean you have to do it badly. Especially since on paper the Black Suit Saga isn't that really hard to do, and it just seems right up Sam Raimi's alley. I mean, from a visual perspective, he nails the look of the Venom symbiote. Like, it genuinely looks so creepy, and much better than the Tom Hardy version that we're getting nowadays. Plus, he manages to put all the iconic imagery of the Black Suit from the 90s cartoon and comics perfectly onto the big screen. To me, the main problem with the Venom arc in this film is the way Sam Raimi chooses to represent certain things, namely Eddie Brock and the tonal inconsistency when it comes to portraying Peter under the influence of the symbiote. Topher Grace as Eddie Brock to me is just miscast. Yes, I get that Sam Raimi wanted to make him the reverse of Peter Parker, but to me he just isn't big enough or menacing enough to play Eddie Brock, and he ultimately is just unfunny and really annoying in this film.
You're trash, Brock.
Funny thing though, I genuinely do think Topher Grace would have made an amazing Peter Parker back in the day, because having watched that 70s show, his character Eric Foreman is essentially just Peter Parker without superpowers. I mean, if anything, Topher Grace would have made an amazing Peter Parker in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 1 instead of Tobey Maguire. Don't get me wrong, I'm genuinely glad that we got Tobey, but it's interesting to think of Topher Grace as Peter Parker back in the day. I think that could have worked. Now, Harry Osborn in this film to me is incredibly underwhelming. We spent 2 movies getting him to the point where he is now the new Green Goblin, and he just sucks. Instead of getting a creepy and menacing Harry Osborn, we instead get James Franco in a ski mask and a flying snowboard. Like, to me, that's just really lame. Like, if we're going to make Harry the Green Goblin, just put him in a better version of the Willem Dafoe Green Goblin costume. Like, at the time, it was 2007, you could have easily have made him a better Green Goblin armor, not this weird black leather snowboarder look. Like, just... why? It sucks. Now, the amnesia angle in this film also just doesn't work. Like, yes, it's a core element of the Green Goblin character in the comics, but just, when you put it onto film, it doesn't work. It feels hokey and corny and just, yeah, it doesn't work. It genuinely would have worked so much better if Harry was just faking his amnesia. Like, that in itself would have been really cool, but just, the film doesn't do that. Now, with all that being said, I genuinely do think James Franco as Harry Osborn in this movie is just so amazing in this film. He knows the script is not that great, so he just hams up his performance, and it's genuinely amusing. And the taste, strawberries.
So good.
He is genuinely so great in this movie. And I will say, I do like Harry Osborn's redemption arc at the end. Like, when he enters the final battle, when he helps Peter, and, like, him and Peter, like, link hands or whatever, into the sign of their friendship, and then the Raimi theme comes in and kicks in. Yeah, it's awesome. It's a great moment. And I do like the scene where he's dying and Peter and him reconcile. Like, that is good stuff. But, I mean, overall, I am disappointed with the arc of Harry Osborn in this film. I mean, just him as the Green Goblin would have been so cool, and just the movie makes it so underwhelming. But overall, the supporting cast is still really good. Rosemary Harris is still amazing as Aunt May. I mean, I love her in this movie. She doesn't have much of an impact in this film as she did in, say, Spider-Man 2, but she is still a really nice presence. J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson is still on fire as always. I mean, he is always great.
You want a staff job and you want a staff job. Anybody care about what I want?
I do.
Shut up. Get out.
And I genuinely do love the humor in the Daily Bugle in this film. I mean, the joke with the pills is really funny. And also, I just love the line, Spider-Man with his hand in a cookie jar. I love that line. And to me, I've always found this funny. Like, as a kid, I always thought, hey, Peter, why don't you just go home, put on the Spider-Man costume, stick your hand in the cookie jar and take a picture of it, and then give it to J. Jonah Jameson? Like, I don't know why I thought of that as a kid, but to me, that's always something I just thought was really funny. Also, I have to mention this character because I didn't mention him in my Spider-Man 2 review, and that is Mr. Ditkovich. Mr. Ditkovich is a godsend. I didn't mention him in my Spider-Man 2 review just because in that film, he's more or less just the comic relief, but in Spider-Man 3, he genuinely has some character moments, and it's really great.
If it's a woman you're calling, then you say, you're a good woman, I'm good man.
I mean, he is genuinely amazing in both of these films. I just didn't mention him in Spider-Man 2 just because there wasn't much to him there. But I mean, he does have some great lines in that movie. I have eyes like a cat and ears like a rodent. And from a technical perspective, Spider-Man 3 is genuinely great. I mean, yes, some of the CGI is a little outdated, but other than that, the film looks beautiful. I remember at the time it was quoted as being one of the most expensive movies ever made, and you can kind of tell just by looking at it. Bill Pope's cinematography is wonderful. I won't lie, I am a little sad that he got rid of the pinkish hue from Spider-Man 2, and in many ways, when they flash back to clips from Spider-Man 2 in this film, they change the color grading and don't give it the pinkish hue, and I'm like, no, that's the best part of Spider-Man 2. Why did you get rid of the pinkish hue? But I mean, I digress. From a technical perspective, yes, Spider-Man 3 is great. That's not what the film falters at all. Ultimately, the main problem with Spider-Man 3 is the script. I'll tell you what isn't bad though. Christopher Young's score. Like, holy crap, I love this score so much. I mean, I adore the Venom theme. Honestly, it's so good. I love it. Just every time I watch this movie, it's the best. The Sandman music is also really great, and I'm not just talking about his villain theme. The little motif that plays whenever he looks at the locket of his daughter, it is genuinely so beautiful. And like I mentioned earlier, this film has my favorite rendition of the responsibility theme. Just when Peter goes back to his house and the music's all like duh, duh, dun 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 dun, and like the drums are like banging in the background too. Like, oh, it's so good. And overall, Spider-Man 3, I would say, is not a terrible film. And I wouldn't call it bad either, it's just problematic. And when you compare it to other regarded problematic Spider-Man films like The Amazing Spider-Man 2, I honestly prefer The Amazing Spider-Man 2 to Spider-Man 3 just purely because the characters in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 are so much more likable. The relationship between Peter and Mary Jane in this film is just so horrible and toxic that it does hold me back from enjoying this film a little bit. But again, like I've said, this film is still well paced, it's still well made, the cinematography is amazing, the performances are good. It's just the character work is not that great. And there are some genuinely spectacular sequences of action. I mean, Peter rescuing Gwen from the crane crash, that is so genuinely amazing. And again, there is heart and sincerity in the script. It's just that the ideas Raimi and company put down on paper just aren't that well executed. Now, would I have loved to have seen Sam Raimi Spider-Man 4? I mean, sure. But also, I'm not mad that we didn't get it, because in some ways, the ending to Spider-Man 3 does feel like a conclusion of some sorts. I mean, it's a much more satisfying ending compared to The Amazing Spider-Man 2, where, like, Peter and Rhino are just mid-fight and that's it. Like, I need Amazing Spider-Man 3, I don't need Spider-Man 4. That doesn't mean I would not have liked to have seen Spider-Man 4. I would have, it's just that when people go, oh, I want Spider-Man 4, I'm more like, no, I want Amazing Spider-Man 3. But honestly, this is just how I feel about Spider-Man 3. It's not that bad. But what do you guys think about it? Let me know in the comments down below. Like, subscribe, follow me on social media, it's all down in the description. Until we meet again, see you guys next time. Ba-ba-da-da-da-da!